manner. If you have your Bibles with you, go ahead and open up to Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. This is the last week in our 10 Commandments series. If you've been here with us the whole time, you've made it through 11 weeks of 10 Commandments. Good job. You should be proud of yourself. Anyway, 10 Commandments, the very last one. As always, when you see the capital L-O-R-D, you'll hear me read Yahweh, because in the Hebrew, that's what it says. Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, Yahweh your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of Yahweh your God in vain, for Yahweh will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath day of Yahweh your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant or your cattle or the sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them and rested on the seventh day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which Yahweh your God gives to you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, and you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, and you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant or his female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant or his female servant or his ox or his donkey or his brand new Tesla, her brand new iPhone 11 Pro Max or his new house in the Heights or the recent family trip to Italy, his or her status, promotion, whatever it is that they have, or anything that belongs to your neighbor, you shall not covet, is a fitting end, in my opinion, to the 10 Commandments. Because it is both, at the same time, the best of news and the worst of news. Our best friend and worst enemy, if you will, our frenemy maybe. What we all need, I think, as we enter into this season of Advent beginning next week. And it's all wrapped up in this tidy and little innocent commandment that I think we all know, you shall not covet. Now I say it this way, that this is indeed the worst of news and the best of news this morning, because I think this commandment more than any other throughout the 10 reveals so intimately and clearly and just kind of raw, right? How sinful we actually are, and therefore how truly amazing grace is. When this commandment hits home, it'll make you simultaneously feel so utterly worthless and ashamed, and yet so loved and accepted. I call this the good Christian exposer, the pretender destroyer, and the fake it till you make it killer, which is a lot of what times we do. In this commandment, right, if you look at the commandment, this commandment gave the Apostle Paul fits. This is the commandment that slayed the mighty King David, which is huge because if you know anything about David, when this happened to him, he was what's known as the man after God's own heart. And yet for both, coveting got the best of them. Here's what it says in Romans. It'll be on the screen. This is Paul speaking. I would not have yet come to know sin except through the law, for I would not have known about coveting if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, taking opportunity through the commandment, produced in me coveting of every kind. For apart from the law, sin is dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, this commandment, sin became alive and I died, he says. And this commandment, which was to result in life, proved to result in death for me. For sin, taking an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me and through it killed me. This commandment revealed to Apostle Paul just how wretched he was. You know the story of David? David one night saw a bathing and beautiful Bathsheba and he coveted her. And then he took her and he slept with her and then he got her pregnant. It did not matter to David that night that Uriah was on the battlefield fighting his war and that Bathsheba was the wife of one of his most trusted friends and soldiers in Uriah, someone who saved him and rescued him when he was in the wilderness. It did not matter. And to make it worse, once he realized what he had done, he tried to cover it up by bringing Uriah back and saying, hey, can you sleep with your wife so it makes it look like your baby? Obviously, he didn't say that's what he's thinking, right? And when that didn't work, he realized the only thing that he could do was to place Uriah on the front lines of the next battle, which is effectively murdering him. You shall not covet. That's why Martin Luther says, click, this last commandment then is given not for the rogues in the eyes of the world, but precisely for the most pious, that's like faithful, right? Hardcore Christian we would call, who wish to be praised and to be called honest and upright people, since they have not offended against the former commandments. You know the story in Mark 10, the rich young ruler? It's in other gospels too. Do you know the story? This rich, young, really handsome, good-looking guy, he's got money, he's got all these things, comes to Jesus and he says, hey, Jesus, what do I got to do? I want eternal life. What do I got to do? And then Jesus tells him, you know the commandments. And then he lists number 5 through 9, from honor your mother all the way up to bear false witness. But he leaves out this one and he says, keep the commandments, basically. And the young ruler confidently says, oh, for real? Like, I kept those. And then it says in Mark 10, Jesus, who feels love for him, says, one thing you lack. Go sell everything you have and give it to the poor, because you'll have treasures in heaven, and then let's go, follow me. And if you know the story, the young ruler, his face falls, he's grieved because he knows he can't do it, and then he kind of just walks on out. Why? Because he owned a lot of things. The commandment shows us, see, maybe outside we can keep these commandments. Maybe on the outside, away from everyone else, right? Out here at church, when everyone can see you, you honor your parents. You're a good boy. You're a good girl. You do what they ask you to do. Maybe on the outside, you're not murdering anybody. Maybe on the outside, you're not adulterating anyone. Maybe on the outside, you're not physically stealing, or you keep your mouths relatively clean. But this one, you cannot fake, because internally, it's raging. See, no matter how much you look the part of a good Christian, this one really reveals what's going on in here. It gets at the heart of the matter and the heart of the 10 commandments. As Jesus asked the rich young ruler, I think God is asking us, click, I am right here and I want you to be mine. I desire for you to have no one else but me and to make me your one and only. But you got to trust me, perhaps into the unknown and the uncertain, but I'm here. So will you follow me? It's fitting 1 week before the Advent, no? God is saying, I've rescued you. I've freed you. I've done everything to give you life. What's it going to be? Freedom or slavery? Life or death? And this commandment, you shall not covet, reveals to the core whether and how you will answer that question. So to answer this question for us, as we've been doing throughout the entire series, our normal what, why, and how in that order. What is God saying? What is his commandment? Why is God saying it? And how? So let's jump right in. What is God saying? And I think here's what he's saying. Click. We are the victims of the disease of more. If you want to know where I got that phrase, I got it from Pat Riley, who's a former LA coach, and he's an executive for the Miami Heat, but he talks about it. But anyways, the word covet in Hebrew means literally to desire. And therefore God's saying, don't desire what you don't have, or desire more than that you have. It's the idea that something is lacking, something isn't enough, and I need more, hence the disease of more. Now, when I tell you that, I guarantee you there's a bunch of people in here immediately thinking, wait. Pete, like, what's wrong with that? You can't possibly saying that it's a sin to want, can you? Like, it can't be a sin that I desire, can it? I mean, after all, God is the one who gives us the desires, and we desire after him. So desire can't be in and of itself a sin, and you are absolutely correct. But here's the key. You got to ask yourself, it's not that you desire in general, but it's a matter of what you desire, or better put, what you desire most. Ask yourself, what do I desire most in life? So we started this series by learning that the first commandment, right, reminds us that not only were we made by God, but for God. Hence, click, we are made by God for God. Only God can satisfy. Nothing else is good enough. We've learned this. We know this. You should understand this, at least theoretically, right? And this is critical. It's the one thing that we have to get clear if we're going to understand the rest of it. It means then that when you and I desire and covet that which belongs to someone else, our neighbors, it shows that we are not satisfied by what God has already given to us. Or better put, we aren't satisfied by God himself. Which means, at the heart of it, we've allowed so many things to come in between my relationship of me and God. And when this happens, when something comes in between that, because those things that we place between us and God cannot satisfy us, and we've noticed that God is the only one that can fulfill us because there's nothing good enough for us, then what our hearts end up doing is we begin to crave and reach for anything and everything that promises to satisfy us. Then at the end of this, what ends up happening is that we've created what my professor calls, a hole in the soul. And since we try to run and try to fill it with anything and everything but God, you find out that your soul is running on empty. It's like a car, and the engine light, the empty gasoline light has come on. And then you can see it's just a vicious cycle that goes over and over and over and over again. And then worst of all, when you realize that we are running around trying to fulfill our lives with something other than God and ultimately running on empty, you then discovered that the thing that has come between me and God is simply me, myself, and I. When God is not at the center, myself, have become the center. And what matters to me the most is my needs and fulfilling my needs. Which then, I think as you'll see, will lead us to breaking all the other commandments. I mean, think about it. If me and my needs are not at the center of my universe, do I covet what belongs to my neighbor? Do I murder? Do I commit adultery, steal, or bear false witness? You don't do any of that stuff. So here's what God is saying. And this is what I want you to really think about even as we get into Advent, as we finish this series. I think God is saying to us in this commandment, particularly throughout the entire thing, just wrapping it up, summarizing it all up. He's saying, I have rescued you and given you a life of freedom. But he's saying, you will give it away if you do not make me your one and only. Don't get it twisted. And you will know that you have let something or someone come between me and you when you begin to covet that which isn't yours. Coveting is a clear sign that you aren't satisfied and you are a slave to the disease of more and running on empty. Therefore, you shall not covet. It's a matter of satisfaction. Are we satisfied with God and what he's given to us? Or do we have this hole in the soul, this deep desire that's meant for God that we're trying to fill with something else? So that's what I think God is saying. Then second, why does then God say this? And I think we're going to spend a little bit of time here. The reason why God says this, in my opinion, because it is the root, and the greatest sign that we are definitely not free. We are slaves. Consider this, okay? I'm going to be quoting from my friend Mike Yankowski a lot. Michael Yankowski, you may have heard of him. He wrote this book. But consider these quotes. He says this: freedom isn't about being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want to do it. Freedom is about being able to choose and then act toward what is good. It is about the opportunity to grow towards one's telos, which is the Greek word for purpose or maturity, for which you have been created. He's saying freedom is the ability to choose that which you were made for, not the freedom to do whatever it is you want whenever you want to do it. And the unfortunate thing about all of us, if we could just be brutally honest for a second, is that you and I believe and we live in a culture that we should do whatever it is that makes me happy. Do you, bro. Whatever floats your boat, do your thing, right? And when you think about it, what the world is telling you to do is that this includes that we should do and experience and have and consume everything. The goal in life is to do, to see, and to be all, everywhere, all the time, it seems. The world tells you, forget the limits. Who wants to be limited by anything? Impossible is nothing, they'll say. No limitations on anything. We want to shed all of our limitations, be completely free to see everything, experience everything, and then love everyone. Isn't that what the world tells you? Does it sound like a good idea? But here's what happens. And again, this is more Mike Yankowski. He says, as a result, we are utterly bound to the idea that bigger will be better. It's appropriate here in Texas. That larger will be stronger, and that just a little bit more will be safer, sturdier, more stable. It is always future tense, never present, always just around the corner of the next accomplishment, the next milestone. I've been blinded, he says, and have been blinded myself to the abundance around me by constantly searching for the evasive and fleeting and retreating more. The world we live in is worse than even the world that I grew up in, and I'm not even that old. Because again, let's be honest, we don't even like things, to be honest, because we're always constantly upgrading, obsessed at the next big thing. That's our world. After we get the newest AirPods Pro, we immediately go to YouTube and look up the next technology and how they're going to improve what you don't like about the AirPod Pro. Hoping and wishing that the newer version will come sooner or later. Hopefully sooner. That's why Michael Yankowski says, we aren't addicted to things anymore. Now we are addicted to the experience of obtaining something new. It's unbox therapy at its best. And this is why Richard Mullins was a songwriter. He says, everybody I know says that they need just one thing. What they really mean is that they need just one more thing. Now again, there's many people I think that would ask, okay, wait. Yeah, okay, maybe it's a little excessive and a little much, but really what's wrong with all of that? Isn't this what you call ambition, Pastor Pete? Isn't this what you call drive? How will anyone ever achieve a greatness or success if we don't take this idea and run with it? Isn't that why we should, as they say, never be satisfied? That's the world you live in. Never be satisfied, they say. Now, I'm not saying ambition, drive, and all these things aren't good. And so indeed, some of it is partly true. But again, I remind you, what matters is the object of our desire, the object of the more that you and I want. Because if the object of what you want is not God, I'm promising you, we will always, 100% of the time, become addicted to whatever that thing is and become enslaved to it, and you will ruin and destroy our lives in the process. It's what the whole series has been aiming at. I hope you've seen. How many familial relationships as Korean Americans have been destroyed because the thing that we all want, or our parents say that we want, is for your educational success? Even in the church, how much of our lives have been ruined because your parents tell you that the best thing for you to do is be a good person, and that becomes our addiction and our obsession. Name the number of things that you're supposed to have and to enjoy that you just become addicted to and you can't get away from. See, we say we want freedom. We say we want love and goodness and joy and peace and life. We say we want all these things, but I have to ask, do we really? Because without God at the center, freedom is impossible. Take that to the bank. If our desire isn't for God and more of God, then you will fall victim to the sin of coveting and the disease of more. I don't know of anything that doesn't describe our lives right now better than that, it seems to me. It's kind of like this. There's a story about 100 years ago. I've told this story before. But a farmer wanted to kill the wolves that were killing his animals and eating his stuff. So during the winter, he took a deer leg and he saved one big old deer leg, right? And then he buried a bunch of razor blades in it with the blades facing out. Then he tied it up, and then he tied it to a tree about maybe a quarter of a mile away from his house, this big old tree in the middle of the winter. Okay, and he laid it out early. And the wolves who were in the wilderness smelt it, right, from far away, and it took them a couple hours, but they eventually got there. But by the time they got there, the whole thing was frozen solid. But they were ravenously hungry. It's winter, and so they started to look at it, and they wanted to eat it, but it's frozen. So what do they do, right? What do you do when it's frozen? You start licking it. So they start licking at it like madly, this pack of wolves licking at it. And in the process, the moment they get to that first layer of ice, they get to the razor blade, and then they lick their razor blade and they cut their tongues. But now the smell of blood, their own, is more and more just raging, and so they go crazy, and they're just going at it over and over and over again until they bleed out and they die. Gruesome, I know. But it's not that far off from who we are. See, the deer leg in this situation also, let me remind you, doesn't just represent things. When God says don't covet, he doesn't mean just things. The deer leg represents all the things that we've become addicted to. Yeah, of course, substance and sex and all that stuff. We've talked about that. But ask yourself, does the deer leg and our addictions not represent these things? What about ideas? What about success? What about work, relationships, power, accolades, status, reputation, admiration, acceptance? All of these things, every single one of us, if not all of them, at least one or two, we're chasing like rabid wolves and not knowing that the thing that we're chasing is killing us. I've said it before, but my heart breaks for a lot of the younger females in the room because you're told that the thing you want in life is to get all the Instagram likes. And let's just be brutally honest, you know you won't get the likes unless you show a little bit more skin. And so after a little bit, once you get to 400 likes, maybe you'll put on a little bit more of a promiscuous outfit. And then you go a little bit further and a little bit further, and we all know where that ends. That's the addiction of the more that we cannot curb because we do not know. We are the ravenous wolves licking at the smell of our own blood. The question is, will we keep chasing? My daughter is in gymnastics. I apologize, honey, I didn't get your permission to share this story. I think it's okay. She's in gymnastics, and when you're in gymnastics, you have to wear a leotard, right? It's kind of cute, but it's kind of not. I don't know how I feel about it, my 4-year-old daughter wearing a leotard. But anyways, she grew out of the last one. It was a little too tight. It's wedgie city all over the place, so we had to get her a new one. And so my wife Christina wanted to order a new one, and she wanted to order one, and then she showed me a couple options. The first option was a long sleeve one, but it's the one that looks like the one that actual gymnasts wear. And then she goes, should we get this one? And I said, hell no. Sorry for the language. And I was like, what happened to the ones with the shorts? And then I asked her, why did you want to get her that one? And her one reason, very innocent, was this is what real gymnasts wear. So I said, oh, sorry to say, but for the idea that you want our 4-year-old daughter, Olympic gymnast to look successful, you'd rather expose everything down here so that anyone and everyone in that gym can look? It ain't worth it. This is why Thomas Merton says this. It's on the screen. It should be accepted as the most elementary human and moral truth that no man or woman can live a fully sane and decent life unless he or she is able to say no on occasion to his or her natural bodily appetites. No man who simply eats and drinks whenever he feels like eating and drinking, who smokes whenever he feels the urge to light a cigarette, who gratifies his curiosity and sensuality whenever they are stimulated, can consider himself a free person. He has renounced his spiritual freedom, has become the servant of bodily impulse. Therefore, his mind and his will are not fully his own. They're under the power of his appetite. You have to be able to say no to the things that you know aren't good for you. Remember, freedom is the ability to choose that which is for your best. It's why we live this kind of life where we're chasing after everything. In this life, I think you can say, it's just, this is the way I look at the life that we live. It's restless, it's dissatisfied, it's frustrated, it's anxious, and it's aching. Isn't it? That's all we feel all the time. When is the last time you actually felt peace? When's the last time that our desire wasn't greater than our satisfaction? How, if I asked you, if I gave you a piece of paper and said, define enough on a paper, how would you do it? Do we even know the meaning of that word? Or are we incapable because we are addicted to more, desperate for more, and diseased with more? Then I think the question that we must ask ourselves, you'll see it on the screen, is what do we do with this desire of ours? Because we all have them. but what we do with it is what's important. Again, more for Michael Jankowski on the screen. The tragic irony today is that we've been pushed toward a new slavery by the rhetoric of freedom. The idea of freedom, he says, we've been pushed to. Freedom, liberty, and self-determination. Instead, we now find ourselves mired in the intensely arrogant belief that the pinnacle of freedom is a society of individuals running around pursuing whatever they feel like without any thought whatsoever about what we've been created for. When's the last time we decided to do something or engage in something because it was what we were made for, not just what we want? It's why I ask you in here. I don't mind, my heart breaks, but I don't mind if you don't want to listen to this and if you don't care about this and you want to sit outside. I don't mind that, right? That's your prerogative. But the one thing that I ask you in here is to do something, is to not do things that distract the others. Why? Because it's what is good for us. Choose, even in your own things. Like, I don't want to listen to it, then go outside and don't listen to it. That's your thing. But at least we would choose that which is for the good and what we were created for. That's what loving others looks like. But we don't do that. We don't remind ourselves that not only were we made by God, but for God. This is crucial in our day today. So then the third question of the day. Now what? How do we keep this commandment? Where do we go from here? Okay. And as we've done in the past few weeks, some practical suggestions and then some deeply personal ones, okay? First, the practical, although in this sense, today specifically, you won't be able to do the practical unless you do the personal, but I'll give you the practical first to kind of finish off with the personal ones, okay? So first, practical suggestion is to redirect the craving. I think we've learned, hopefully today, that all of our longings, and we've learned throughout this series that all of our longings are really symptoms of our greatest and deepest desire for God. Remember the quote, every man knocking at the brothel, right, is knocking on the heart of God, right? That every desire we have is an indication that we desire and crave more deeply God and his kingdom. Every desire we have is saying that we need to be satisfied with something that'll satisfy us, and the only thing that'll satisfy us is God. So the first practical thing is you redirect and reorient and change, right, the longing and our long for God. It's why God says, or Jesus says, see it on the screen, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, he says in Matthew. That word seek in the Greek literally means to persecute. That's a very strong and passionate word, right? To persecute God and his kingdom, to go hard after God. So much that when you're going hard after God, that all the other things simply fade away. More than the things that you seek after that, and then everything else comes into light of that. Because again, I remind you, and you can try it till the day you die, you will not be satisfied with anything else other than God. Because every craving is a craving for the Lord and will only be satisfied when you are satisfied by God, and then he makes everything else better. So redirect your cravings. Second practical suggestion. Fitting, because today's Thanksgiving Sunday and we're going right into Advent. Second practical suggestion, you'll see it on the screen, is give away as much as you can. Now you may have heard this term that less is more, but here's what I was taught, my professor taught me, is this, click, need less in order to be more. Need less to be more. I think we have to know that we're buying into a lie. Funny, we're discussing this right before Black Friday. That we don't actually need all the stuff that we have. And then to be sure, we definitely don't need all the stuff that we want. We don't need all the stuff that we have, and we definitely don't need all the stuff that we want. Because the fact of the matter is that you and I, we need Jesus. We need the kingdom. And that's not just good Christian pastor talk. That's just the truth. And so you give away more and all that you can so that we can have more of the kingdom. See, when I first heard this, I thought my professor was crazy. You're probably like maybe in the same boat as I am. I was like, what in the world does that mean? How does that make any sense? But then you start to think and you start to look at what Jesus says, and he says, it's more blessed to give than to receive. You've heard that? And then it made sense to me like this. And then my professor said it like this, and it just, I will never forget this. He says, yes, of course we give because others are in need. But we give because we are in need. We need to continually give so that our souls do not buy into the lie that more and all this stuff that we have fills and heals the hole in our souls. When you give away the stuff that you have, you're proclaiming to the Lord, I don't need this because you are enough. But when you don't do it, then you're proclaiming to God and the world, I need this to make me happy and satisfied. Then you fall into that trap, and it's a long, long, long way out to get out of that hole. Need less to be more. Need less things, time, relationships, love, adoration, affirmation, all those things. Need that less. And be more, because God will fill that hole. And again, fitting, Thanksgiving and Advent begins next week. Then our personal applications, and we finish here. I think there's 2 of these. First, admit and acknowledge our cravings. Name it, own it. Now this may sound odd, because maybe we grew up in a Christian tradition that tells us that we should just kind of push everything to the side, right? It's a Sunday, so get dressed. Forget everything that happened in the week, just get dressed and come, really nice and looking the way that we're supposed to look. Maybe what you've been told is that you need to stop it, quit it, avoid it, etc. But at some point, if you live long enough, you realize avoiding it, stopping it, quitting it does not actually work, does it? When's the last time you told yourself that these are the bad things in my life, these are things that I shouldn't do, I'm just gonna stop it? How long does it last? If we could just quit and stop our cravings, curb our addictions, you wouldn't need anyone, and certainly not me, to tell you to fix it, because you would just do it. We've learned that just avoiding the desires is simply just suppressing them, and they'll rear their head at some point or another. I grew up in a family of alcoholics. How do you know when an alcoholic is no longer addicted to the alcohol? Is it because they've been sober for a year? No. You will know that an alcoholic is no longer addicted to the alcohol when you can go and take him or her to a bar or to a restaurant and have an alcoholic beverage in front of him or her, and they are not tempted, or they can have one and not fall into all the stuff that they've always fallen into. That's how you know they're free. Avoidance does not mean much. It just means that you're good at avoiding things. Freedom is being able to choose that which is good over that which you want. Remember earlier I said at the very beginning that this commandment is the best news and the worst of news? See, Paul realized this, and he tells it exactly like it is in Romans 7. And I'm going to read it to you in the Message version. It's a long passage, but just listen to this. This is Paul writing, and he's realizing what this commandment is doing into us and doing in us. And I want you to hear and figure out if this is how you feel. And this is the journey that I want you to take in this practical application, in this personal application, okay? To hear this, and you can go read this. It's from Romans 7. It's in the Message version. You can read this. It'll be on the screen. And he says this, again, from the Message version. What I don't understand about myself is that I decide one way, but then I act another. Doing things that I absolutely despise. That's an amen if I ever heard one. So if I can't be trusted to figure out what is best for myself and then do it, it then becomes obvious that God's command, the do not covet, is necessary. But I need something more. For if I know the law but still can't keep it, if I know the rules, if I know the intention and can't keep it, and if the power of sin within me keeps sabotaging my best intentions, then I obviously need help. This is where the acknowledging part comes in, right? If I decide to do good but don't really do it, if I decide not to do bad and then I do it anyway, my decisions, such as they are, don't result in actions. Something has gone wrong deep within me and gets the better of me every time. That's another amen if I heard one. If so happens regularly, that is predictable. The moment I decide to do good, sin is there to trip me up. I truly delight in God's commands, but it's pretty obvious that not all of me joins in that delight. Part of me covertly rebels, and when I just least expect it, they take charge. I've tried everything and nothing helps. I'm at the end of my rope. I hope you know that every Christian in the world, that's like the thing you say every single day of your life. I'm at the end of my rope. I'm so poor in spirit. Is there no one who can do anything for me, he cries. Isn't that the real question? And then he continues. The answer, thank God, is that Jesus Christ can and does. With the arrival of Jesus, the Messiah, we're celebrating it next week and the next month, that faithful dilemma is resolved. Those who enter into Christ being here for us no longer have to live under a continuous, low-lying black cloud. A new power is in operation. The Spirit of life in Christ, like a strong wind, has magnificently cleared the air, freeing you from a fated lifetime of brutal tyranny at the hands of sin and death. With the arrival of Jesus, the Messiah, that faithful dilemma. Oh, I just read that. God went for the jugular when he sent his own son. He didn't deal with the problem as something remote and unimportant. In his son, Jesus, he personally took on the human condition, entered the disordered mess of struggling humanity in order to set it right once and for all. This is grace. But here's the thing that we all must accept. You will not get to the grace unless you accept and recognize how worthless and unable you are to keep this. Unless you say, I'm at the end of my rope. Even when I want to do good, the sin in me makes me do the worst. See? When we recognize how sinful we are and how much that sin rages in us and how helpless we are to defeat it on our own. And when we realize that we do not have anything close to what it takes to defeat it, that's the worst news part. Then the only thing you will do, because you'll say, then what can help me? Who can help me? How can I get away from this mess? How do I stop doing the sin? How do I stop doing these things? How do I stop bearing false witness? How do I stop taking crazy things? How do I stop, watching pornography? How do I do all these things? And you are finally at the end of your rope, say, I cannot do anything to help myself. And then you will turn to the one who can and does help you. That's the best news part. And then Jesus, in response, comes down from the mountain into our hearts, and then he fills our hearts with himself. It's why Ezekiel 36:26 says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. That's why the psalmists cry out, create in me, God, a new heart. But don't let anyone tell you that you can get to grace without first accepting and admitting and acknowledging and naming and laying down your sin. It's maybe the greatest fallacy in the church, that you can cover your sin by doing all these great things. No. One of my favorite quotes of all time, it's not on the screen, is that grace is odious, it's worthless, it's repugnant, it's just disastrous to us. Why? Because when you have grace, you realize why you have it. It's because you need it. So first admit, and then the second personal application is worship God. With all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, with absolutely everything. Now this isn't the cliche, okay? This isn't the thing that pastors tell you all the time, just worship God and just do this. No. That's not what I'm doing. Because many of you then will go home and say, I do that, Pastor Pete. I do worship God. I come here every Sunday. I do all these things. I am. Why are you telling us to do something more that we already do? I already feel obligated as it is. Why are you laying down more burden? But it ain't like that. Let me clarify for you. Worshiping God, I hope you know, is learning to enjoy God. Let me say that again. Click, it'll be on the screen. Worshiping is learning to enjoy God. One theologian says that we must feast on God like we did this past Friday. For those of you who are Thanksgiving, we saw the video. You feast to the same degree that we fill our bellies with great food every Thanksgiving. And this week, hopefully, we will fill our souls with more and more and more of Jesus until you feel like you can't move because you're so full of him. That's why in Ephesians he says, be filled with the Spirit. It's like being drunk on wine. The Westminster Catechism is this long manual of things. This is what it says, and we want to finish here. Click. The chief end of humanity is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Did you hear that? The chief end, the goal of our lives is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. But many people have argued that this is probably not the best way to put it, and so they changed it in some ways, and this is what they say, and I agree. The chief end of God, or chief end of humanity is to glorify God by enjoying him forever. Is that the mark of our lives? The end goal of my life and your life is to enjoy God and therefore glorify him. This is why this season is what it is. The aim for this season of Advent as we go into is to celebrate our God, to honor him, to worship him, to enjoy the fact that in him he is coming to us. And that coming to us is the greatest thing because it allows him to enjoy him forever and ever and ever. Worship isn't just on Sundays, it's every single day, every morning. One theologian says, don't you dare start any day without having had your fill of God, because then you will ruin yourself. So ask yourself as we finish, what are you desiring? And more importantly, when you think about what you desire most, ask yourself, does this thing or this one person actually fulfill and satisfy me? Because if the answer to that is no, which it will, then you only have one alternative that actually works, and that's God. It's not your success. It's not your acumen. It's not your accolades. It's not a kind of family you have. It's not the cars you drive. It's not the house you own. None of those things will ever satisfy. It's not your social status. It's not being an influencer. It's not any of those things. The only thing that will truly satisfy and fulfill our hearts is God himself. For those of you who are married or getting close to marry, or if you dream of that, that's why every single person will tell you marrying someone doesn't fix anything. It doesn't fix the junk in your heart. You have to work on that. We will only be satisfied by God. Therefore, he says, you shall not covet, because that's how you enslave yourself. So could you take a moment, a brief moment, to just think through that a little bit? What do I desire most? And is it really satisfying me? Because all of you are smart enough to know that if you can answer those questions and you answer that question isn't satisfying you and yet you keep going after it, and then when you do realize that it's not satisfying you, then will you do one thing and say, God, I want to enjoy you forever. Help me. And then we will sing. I'm going to give you a minute to respond, and then we'll pray for our offering, and then we'll get into last worship. But would you take this time, young and old, and then we will sing together.